There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey everybody, welcome to the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. As always, I am surrounded, I am flanked, I am shoulder to shoulder among giants. Mike McGrady.
Yeah, I'm here.
He's here. And Nephi Cole is always here.
Always. I'm on. Yep, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, you're always here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like omniscience, only different.
I don't even think you pronounced that right.
All right.
Happy Giving Tuesday, everybody. Here we are, first Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and it's become a national tradition. What we have Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Giving Tuesday. And Giving Tuesday is important. Opportunity for you all to give to a charity of your choice. Please take that opportunity. If you haven't given this year, if you have the opportunity and the capacity to do so, think about giving wherever you feel like giving. But this is the Your Mountain podcast, and we talk about these issues dealing with land, water, and wildlife. And so if you've got a conservation sportsman's organization that you feel strongly about and you want to see your opportunities to recreate, hunt, fish, backpack, mountain bike, whatever it happens to be, on public lands, consider making a donation to a charity of your choice.
Yep.
Great nonprofit of your choice, right?
Right.
I know I will be doing that today, and hopefully you all consider it as well. Second order of business, as always, I hope you enjoy what you listen to here. If you do, head out to wherever you get this podcast and give us a rating. Well, preferably a 5-star rating, right?
Yes, good ratings.
Good ratings, please.
Yep. I'll take a fair review.
Well, good rating and then a fair review. Right?
Yeah.
So rate us, leave us a comment, send us an email if you've got feedback. We appreciate the emails we get from listeners.
Yeah, great ideas in there.
A lot of great ideas. Some of the podcasts we do come directly from listener feedback. Our email address is yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. So send us a message, and we look forward to hearing from you. So before we talk about what we're going to talk about today, I got to tell you what I had for dinner tonight. So I had taco potatoes, and
What'd you have for lunch?
I had tacos.
Yeah.
It is Taco Tuesday after all. It may be Giving Tuesday, but it's also Taco Tuesday.
That's right.
So I had taco potatoes. I had.
That's a real thing.
It is.
I guess.
It is a real thing. I had potatoes grown by a farmer somewhere
in Idaho.
Probably in Idaho.
That's right.
I had onions grown by a farmer somewhere. I had lettuce grown by a farmer somewhere.
Not in Idaho.
I had red pepper grown by a farmer somewhere.
Also not Idaho.
I had sour cream and cheese.
Wisconsin.
Probably.
Thank you.
And then I had about a half a pound of meat, mule deer that I got this season. And I'm pretty thankful that I was able to have mule deer. And you were telling me something earlier, Nephi, before we started this podcast. You were telling me something. This is a fascinating statistic. And the reason why I'm telling you what I had to eat, who cares what I had to eat, right? I'm telling you that everything...
No one. We'll just be clear.
Nobody cares what I ate. But the point of what I ate was everything that I ate, except for that deer that I killed myself. Everything else that I ate was provided to me by a farmer somewhere in the United States.
Somebody grew it for you.
Somebody grew it for. And for most people in the United States, that meat that they might be having with that taco potato that you all are so judging me about right now for having probably came from something that a rancher raised.
Somebody grew it.
Somebody grew it.
Just like they grew, like just most people, you might have a garden and you might grow some of your produce. We hunt, we grow some, we harvest some of our meat.
Right. You were telling me the average American.
Yep.
The average American consumes 222 pounds of meat a year.
That's correct.
Now,
how much is that as a country?
as a country.
Do the math.
Just really quick, right off the top of my head, about 103 billion pounds.
Well done.
That's pretty good math,
Man.
right? I know.
For a guy who doesn't know how to use a calculator.
It's all. I don't need to
Well,
I don't
it's
need to
on
use
the
it. It's all in
sheet
my
in
head.
front of him.
Yeah.
Stop giving
Oh,
away
I'm
the
sorry.
secrets.
I'm
Stop
sorry.
giving away the secrets.
You're waving your yellow pad in front of me.
But 222 pounds. Now I think most people are saying I don't eat that much, and that might be true. I eat so much meat that it probably ticks that up a little bit for everybody. It actually has a statistically significant impact on the average, and you guys do probably too.
Yes.
But the point is, we eat a lot of meat in this country, and a lot of us and a lot of our listeners, they enjoy hunting and they enjoy getting their own meat. But can you imagine what would happen if everybody in America had to go out and hunt for their 222 pounds of meat? What would happen?
Yeah. Well, let's see. How many million people in this country right now?
Like roughly 340 million?
340 million. How many deer to get to 222 pounds of meat?
Oh, don't make me start doing that math. A lot of deer.
Yeah. So what is it going to be? Depending on the size of the deer, how much did you get off your mule deer?
I probably got about 50 pounds.
So you're talking 4 to 5 mule deer.
And that was a big mule deer.
Per person
Yeah.
on an average. And then you think about whitetails, you'd be 8.
yeah, probably.
So, I mean, it's just a really interesting thing to think about. So if everybody were just, like if tomorrow we were going to wave a magic wand and say we're all going to harvest our own meat, there's a reason that production agriculture exists.
We'd have to kill something like 2.4 billion deer a year to feed Americans.
Market hunting existed for a while. It was not a good thing for our wildlife populations.
Right.
It was a real positive thing when we started getting some people who said, you know what, I can grow, a couple of cows in my backyard and feed a bunch of these people so that we don't have to have a guy rolling around the prairie knocking down everything he sees.
So I've said this before. I said this when we had Ethan Lane on our podcast. I remember saying, if you hunt or fish, thank a rancher. And I said it in a different context, as far as having open spaces and availability for, the habitat for the wildlife that we rely upon. But in this context, if you like to hunt or fish, thank a rancher because they're growing, and thank a farmer because they're growing food for Americans that allow our wildlife population to persist, to not be over-harvested.
They allow us the luxury of being able to have access to, these great opportunities.
Right. So, if you know a rancher, a farmer, thank them. First of all, you're alive because of them, right? We eat, we have to eat, and they're feeding America. So what we wanted to talk about today, we thought this was a nice way to open up, to talk about something that
you didn't think you cared about.
That a lot of sportsmen didn't know they cared about. And hopefully after this, it'll be a primer and they'll start to care about it a little bit more. We want to talk about the Farm Bill. Where did it come from? Why do we have it?
And before you check out, know that there's more to this than just the farm. So as a sportsman, this is very important to you if you care about wildlife.
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, and I should say, so we've got we're trying to line it up right now. We're likely going to run another podcast with a couple of guests to talk about the Farm Bill itself and real world application. So we're going to try and introduce it tonight, but really get into a more detailed conversation in a future podcast on the Farm Bill and hopefully be able to talk to a farmer that's utilizing some of the programs under the Farm Bill, talk to a sportsman's group about the value to sportsmen of the Farm Bill. So we're going to do that, but we want to set the stage for that discussion by letting you know, where did it come from? What does it do today? And when you're reading in the paper or seeing on the news about issues about reauthorizing the Farm Bill in Congress now, what does that mean?
What's the rub? What's the sticking points?
Yeah, what is it? So we're going to cover all that, and we're going to try and do it in about 30 minutes. So here we go. History of the Farm Bill. All right, so take you back, and we're going to run through this pretty quickly, but take you back to right around the time of World War I. So, we always think about
early 1900s.
Early 1900s, right? Yep. Yeah, the 1910s timeframe. We always think about, when we think about agriculture in the world, we think about the United States having this breadbasket and this, the breadbasket of the country and growing all of this produce, all of this.
We still literally do feed the world. We
do
export a huge amount of food.
What's overlooked sometimes is Europe has a huge agriculture economy. They grow a ton of food. And at that time, they were growing a ton of food, and they were able to feed Europe. But then came World War I, and it really disrupted Europe's food supply and production supply. And so it caused the U.S. to ramp up their agriculture production. So we had farmers out there plowing fields left and right to try and meet this growing demand caused by World War I, to be able to ship this product to Europeans, to be able to feed our own growing country. But it was causing agriculture prices, commodity prices to go way up.
Yeah, there's a huge demand for food that somebody else couldn't supply, and so the economics said we're going to supply it right here.
So we were plowing everything up. Then World War I ended.
Plowing and planting, yeah.
Plowing and planting. Then World War I ended, and we had this convergence of factors that caused really a pretty significant crash, right? So we had World War I end, which meant the European farmers could get back online and start producing food. And so now we had commodity prices in the U.S. start to drop. And then converging with that, we came across a
lack of understanding.
And a massive drought.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
Yeah. So you had when I say lack of understanding, I mean, what you had happen is with all this agriculture, you had people learning how to plant more, but you didn't necessarily have the science there to tell people how to plant, how not to plant, what to use, what not to use. And so you saw rampant erosion.
So they're burning out the soil, basically.
They're burning out the soil. Hugh Hammond Bennett was the father of the Soil Erosion Service, later the Soil Conservation Service, which later became the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But when, he was out there, telling everybody, saying, look, the way we are doing this, we are eroding our topsoil. We are, we're getting gullies everywhere. It's not holding the water on the landscape. We don't have cover crops. And at the time, there was, this debate was going on in the nation. You hear about the Dust Bowl. There was these huge, literally clouds of dust, topsoil being blown across the nation, even across Congress, across D.C., while they were debating these problems and how to deal with them.
Right. So all this stuff happened. And by about 1932, you had crop prices that had dropped to the point that they were a third of what they'd been in 1920. And this was creating a national security issue and a national crisis. We were risking losing that production, pricing people out where they were going out of business, and wondering, how are we going to feed our country? And so we came up during the Roosevelt FDR presidency. You hear a lot about the social programs that came out during that time.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk New Deal, and we hear Social Security, right? The Conservation Corps. There's this whole host of programs that came out. Well, one of them was the very first Farm Bill, right? Back in 1933, and the idea was we're going to stabilize crop prices. The whole idea was we're going to subsidize. Subsidize is sometimes a four-letter word for people, but the idea was we're going to pay some farmers to limit their production. So some would continue to do full production, some would limit their production through this subsidy, and it would allow crop prices to stabilize and keep farmers in business.
At the same time this is going on, you also then had a effort to basically, you had the creation of the Soil Conservation Service, 1933 to 1935. Basically, what they came in and actually built in 1935, built the scientific and technical expertise. So you had the financial piece being fixed on one side, and then you had the science being fixed on the other. So then you had technical experts who could go out into the field and tell people how to conserve their soil, where not to plant. They could look at which soils were the inferior soils and say, hey, look, this should not be corn here. This should be a shelter belt. Right.
And so that started by 38. That's a permanent program, and it's renewed every 5 years. And we're still kind of on that basis. The Farm Bill is renewed every 5 years, but a lot of things have been added to it over time, right? So the very first one was dealing with a very specific issue, but then World War II came about, And one of the things during the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II is we had a lot of people in this country that were hungry, right? We had a lot of people that were really struggling. They lost jobs. They couldn't pay for food. And so one of the other things that started around that time, separate program, food stamp program.
Yep. And an interesting backdrop on this, this was viewed as a national security issue because when you had people showing up for the draft and we were looking at, how big does a dude have to be? How many push-ups does he have to be able to do? What quality do people's teeth have to be? A lot of the supplemental nutrition programs came about. They were justified in the name of national security, of trying to have a healthy nation so we could defend ourselves. And that's just an interesting side note.
Right. And as we pulled out of it, as we got towards the end of World War II and our economy started to grow again and we were employing folks, that program ended. We think about the food stamp program. That program actually ended. It was started on a temporary basis. It served its purpose. It ended. And then a couple of decades later, it started up again. And I think it was during the Lyndon Johnson administration, it really firmed up permanently and has become wedded with the Farm Bill.
Yep.
Right. And
that's important for everybody to understand. So you have these multiple pieces of this, or we call them titles now. I think Dave will talk about those. But what you had happen is now you've got these things that are basically riding together in the same bill through Congress that may, at first blush, you may think, well, why are these things related to each other? But the reality is they're all basically related to these same issues of national security for your food and your people. And so you have the nutrition aspect of the Farm Bill along with the crop insurance, along with commodity issues, and along with conservation title.
Yep, which came along in 1985.
Yep, which was also this
is one that
it's really from the beginning, right?
But this is one that it is from the
beginning. The idea is
like,
hey, these things are interrelated. The conservation ethic of the land is important for the economics of our nation. If we don't have this piece here, it's all going downhill.
Right. But this 1985 program is when we're thinking about conservation under the Farm Bill, there's a particular program. There's one program that comes to mind that I think more sportsmen than not would recognize the existence of it.
I bet I know it as WRP.
Huh?
Which one are you?
CRP.
CRP.
Yeah. So Conservation Reserve Program, right?
Yep.
So if you live in the Midwest and you are a pheasant hunter, or you are a member of Pheasants Forever, you are familiar with the CRP program. And this is the one that I think the vast majority of the hunting community, if they know something in the Farm Bill, this is what they know. It's the CRP program. The idea, it sort of meets the conservation purpose of the original Farm Bill, which was we're going to pay you to not grow crops in certain places, right? Effectively creating habitat. And it created an opportunity for a marriage between the sportsman's community and the agriculture community to say, okay, we're going to protect habitat here, and it's going to create opportunities for sportsmen. Right? And so it created an allegiance and allies in working with Congress to try and continue to renew provisions of the Farm Bill, because now it was important to sportsmen to have programs like that. It was important to the producers to have programs like that. So that's the one I'm thinking of. You're thinking of something else?
WRP, Wetland Reserve Program, is another one that sportsmen
came out at the same time.
Yep. So you had WRP. You had a program that sportsmen most recognized called WHIP, the Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program, came out roughly that same time frame. So you had a shift where there was an active decision in Congress to move from the Soil Conservation Service, which before that time didn't really write a whole lot of checks. They were a technical expertise organization. You had a significant shift where suddenly they were given a big checkbook, and they had an opportunity to go out and work with landowners to not only do voluntary conservation where the landowner's paying for everything, but to come in and say, hey, here's a bunch of programs where now we are going to help you put conservation on the ground through these programs that, Dave mentioned, Conservation Reserve Program, which initially another agency was in charge of that, but now Farm Service Agency. But then you had these other technical and financial assistance programs that came in where, for example, your shelter belts, you'd come in if you're a farmer, and this is where the conservation title is at today. You'd go into the now the Natural Resource Conservation Service office versus the Soil Conservation Service, which is what it was originally. You go in there, you find a conservation planner. That conservation planner, you go in and say, hey, you know what? I want to do some conservation of my land. That guy goes out to your place and he looks at the soil, the water, the air, the plants, the animals, and your economics. And he builds a conservation plan with you that you as a farmer, as a rancher, can apply on your place. So the first part, the thing that he does, it's not financial. He comes out and he says, what are the conservation goals? What can we do here to conserve what species, what types of plants, the water, all those other things. Gets all that line out on his map. And then he sits down and says, what can you pay for? What do you want to do? And that's where the financial assistance programs come in. So these financial assistance programs that we know today.
Right. The landowner has to have skin in the game.
That's right. He comes in with skin in the game. But the NRCS then comes in and says, you know what? We want you to put in, 500 acres. If you've got a huge ranch, 500 acres of riparian buffer. And so the question then is like, well, how do you pay for that? If you're a landowner, there's land you're going to take out of production. So you're no longer going to be able to use that land. And there's the cost of, if you're doing stream restoration, you may have to put in willows. You might have to do rock revetments. You might have to do some fish ladders, all those types of things. Well, who pays for that? Well, what happens is right now in the Farm Bill, in this thing called the Conservation Title of the Farm Bill, the NRCS has a tool where they can come in and say, you know what? If you'll do half, we'll do half. We'll pay for half of this. We're going to write you a check so you can get out there and get contractors or, whatever out on the ground to put these conservation practices into place. And so now you have a number of programs that exist today in the Conservation Title of the Farm Bill that were put there by Congress that now are tools for conservation on private lands.
Now, I think it's also important to remember that the Farm Bill is not a sportsman's habitat, sportsman's access. When we think of conservation as hunters and anglers, when we talk conservation under the Farm Bill, we're talking conservation of these land, water, wildlife, these resources for purposes of supporting an agriculture economy. And the sportsman's community becomes a beneficiary of that conservation ethic, right? But it's not a sportsman-centric bill.
It's a secondary beneficiary.
It's a secondary beneficiary.
So when you're working on, let's use water quality as a great example. I used to love dealing with this issue. Everybody knows I'm stuck on the Clean Water Act. So when you go
I promise you, we're still never going to do a podcast on it.
So let's say you're working on restoring a stream that's an impaired stream. So when you go talk to a farmer or rancher about working on that impaired stream, here's what you're selling to them. You're selling to them this idea. Hey, we want to work on this stream, which is a public benefit, right? These miles of stream. We want to come here and do some work to make this water clear and this water clean. So to gain this public benefit of clean water, how about you dish us some private cash? Pay for half of this.
Right.
We're going to pay for the other half as the federal agency. And then the beneficiary, they're going to benefit because it's going to beautify, it's going to protect their ranch, their farm from erosion, it's going to increase the quality of their habitat, but it's also going to benefit sportsmen because all the fish down that stream, all the ducks who are going to land in that riparian area, that's an auxiliary public benefit. So not only do you get the clean water, you get these secondary benefits to the animals that depend on having that great habitat. And that's where the sportsmen benefit from those conservation practices. Yep.
I want to ask you a question. Because I think you know more about this than most people probably do about the Farm Bill. I was going to ask you a question.
Okay. Well,
and I'll come back to it. I don't know what happened there. It just there it is.
When you look
at this, left. It just absolutely left.
So when you look, you can think about it for a second.
I will think about it.
But thinking about the amount of, so for those people who don't understand, the impact that this money has, the Farm Bill over the next 5 years, you're talking about $50 billion that's going to go into conservation in the United States of America in a new Farm Bill. I mean, you're talking about a huge amount of money. To give you an idea, even in
I know what the question was.
What is it?
Okay. So you say the landowners have a 50-50 match, right?
So typically it's anywhere from 50 to 75. It just depends.
Sure. But the question I have is, Does that money have to come from the landowner? Are there other partners out there that help them get there?
Yes. And so here's what's exciting about the Farm Bill and why you guys probably care about it. So these different programs they have in the Farm Bill, they include working lands programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So that's a program, when we say working lands, that means on a working ranch or working farm, that means somebody's going in and helping plan things like shelter belts. That's where they're putting in your artificial wetlands. That's where they're improving wetlands. That's where they're putting in, these are practices that are going on a working landscape every day. EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Programs. And that's where your wildlife habitat, a lot of that work is done. You also have easement programs, and these are under the Agricultural Conservation Easement Programs, ACEP and WRP, where you have land that's being permanently protected, whether it's wetlands protected or lands that are where you're buying an easement that's saying, okay, this land will never be subdivided. It's always going to be in agriculture.
Right.
Now,
but the funding for that.
The funding for that comes from, there's the parts that the federal government pays for. And then to make up the difference. So whether it's 50-50 or 25-75, the private landowner can come to the table with work, with cash, or let's say you're Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
There you go. That's what I was getting at.
You find a ranch that is prime for subdivision in Bozeman, Montana, but that's great elk habitat. How do you keep it in elk habitat? That private landowner, an NGO like TNC or Rocky Mountain Elk or others, will approach that landowner and say, we would like you to keep this as a ranch forever, so these elk always have this winter habitat and it doesn't become somebody's backyard in a street. And so they will sign, so that the federal government, they'll go approach NRCS. NRCS will partner with that NGO and with those landowners.
And it could be more than one NGO.
Could be more than one NGO.
It could be some private donor. I mean, there's a whole host of...
To permanently put that land into conservation easements. And that was actually a huge part of the decision to not list the sage grouse, was conservation easements that were put in on private lands, because those conservation easements gave certainty to the service. It was one of the ways that they could provide certainty that there would be habitat for sage grouse that would be, in perpetuity protected, because you had an agreement where a non-governmental organization came in and bought the rights to development to keep that open space that we talked about on previous podcasts from ever becoming, a neighborhood.
That's right. So some of your dollars, it's Giving Tuesday, right? Some of the dollars that you're contributing to groups like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or the Nature Conservancy or Trout Unlimited, who knows? I mean, it could be any host of groups, and I probably shouldn't start listing them without listing them all. But the point is, some of those donations are going to turn right back around and go on the ground to help some of these landowners to conserve habitat.
Yep.
That then the sportsman can directly benefit from.
So I misspoke earlier when I said $50 million over the next 4 years. It's $30 billion over the next 4 years. And so that's about $7 billion a year in conservation. Now to see the importance of that partner organization or those private landowners. So that means you're taking a $7 billion a year federal investment, and then you have either NGOs or private landowners who now are bringing an additional $7 billion a year, making it $14 billion a year that's getting put on the ground in this great country of ours for conservation every year.
Right. And by comparison, let me just run out a comparison. We've talked Pittman-Robertson Act on this podcast several times, and you hear about it a lot. And it's, sportsmen contributing to conservation. This last year, 2018, the check that went out back to state, the check that the federal government cut to send back to states for Pittman-Robertson dollars was just a hair over $1 billion, which is a lot of money. But put that in perspective with, you said $30 billion, right?
Compare it to Pittman-Robertson at $1 billion a year. Compare it to LWCF, which was authorized at $400 million. And so
it was funded at 400. It's authorized.
Funded. That's right. Funded at $400 million. And when you look at that, you can see that's a huge amount of money that comes from the Farm Bill. It's bigger than any of those other bills that we talk about, those things that we worry about. That Farm Bill is putting significantly more money through the conservation title of the Farm Bill is going to go to habitat, and again, the idea of this wasn't, let's do this for wildlife. But the reality is that conservation of private lands benefits All of us.
If as a landowner, if you are going to manage your land to be productive in perpetuity, it's going to have ancillary benefits, both on water quality, on habitat, on wildlife abundance. And so, these investments in conservation through the Farm Bill have direct benefits for the habitat and the water that our wildlife depends
it's
on.
Public benefits, and that's why we pay for it.
So
it's because there's a recognition that through these investments in conservation on private lands, we gain public benefit of clean air, clean water, healthy soil, conservation security, land security. It's a big deal.
So I really quickly, because I want to talk about what's going on in Congress, but I'm just going to blast through this piece. We've talked about just a couple of pieces of the Farm Bill. So we talked some about the history of it, how we got to where we are today. We talked about the conservation title to the Farm Bill. We've mentioned that there's this nutrition piece of the Farm Bill, which is not just a piece; it's the
80% of it.
It's 80% of it.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the SNAP program, the Supplemental Food Program.
So there are 12 titles, and that's the big one.
So that's the one what I was going to mention is we've talked about a couple titles, but there are 12 titles, and they deal with things like trade. Things like nutrition, things like credit, rural development, research, forestry, ag extension, energy, horticulture. There's all sorts of provisions that we have not touched on here, and we could probably dedicate an entire podcast to each one of those as well. So it's important to know that we're only focusing on the
conservation
small piece of the Farm Bill, but it is a piece that has one of the bigger impacts for the sportsman's community. But in the overall pie of resources allocated by Congress to Farm Bill titles, the conservation program makes up just an absolute sliver of that appropriation.
That's right. It's about 6% of the entire, you have to take different numbers come out. So don't be fooled too easily by just saying, discretionary spending. Everybody trots that out as being, that the farm and conservation less than 1%. That's only looking at discretionary. You combine both, it's significantly more.
When you're saying both, you're saying discretionary and then
mandatory funding.
So there are certain things
we're not going to get into
tonight,
tonight, but it's complex.
Right. So it's distinctions in the budgeting process, the federal budgeting process between discretionary and mandatory funding. But the point is when you combine all of that and the total funding that goes to the Farm Bill.
Of the $500 billion that are going to go out in the Farm Bill, 6% is for conservation.
80% goes to nutrition.
That's right.
So that tees up where we are today. Because we have a Farm Bill that has expired. Right? We are sitting here at the end of November, and we have a Farm Bill that expired at the end of September. Right? I think it expired September 30th.
Yep. That's the end of the budget year. So
right.
Yeah.
So we have a Farm Bill that has expired. We have a debate over what should be in that Farm Bill.
Yep.
And I don't think it's about whether SNAP should be in the Farm Bill or whether conservation should be in it, but
conservation is not really even part of the discussion.
It is.
Although lately it's been focused on wildfire.
Well,
that's right, because there are programs that are
right. The president recently came out and said we want to take $500 million of that and deal with wildfires in California, which is leading into the discussions and debate that Congress is having about reauthorizing.
But also on the House side, you have a fairly significant block of House Republicans that want to see a change to the conservation title because they want to see less money, what they view as subsidies, flowing to farmers and ranchers. Yeah. They want adjustments made to how those monies are delivered.
There's also been significant discussions about stripping the SNAP portion and separating them wholly from one another. And
revising the SNAP. So what qualifies you? What are the qualifications that you have to receive
the work
the food
requirement
assistance?
is the biggest one right now. It's not the big discussion is not necessarily segregating it or the conservation. It's, the House bill that passed narrowly really had to do with the debate over whether or not you got to require somebody to work in order to receive the
supplemental nutritional assistance program,
which is commonly referred to as food stamps.
Yep.
Right. And so, work requirements, age requirements, and such. So there's a discussion going on the House side, at least, about what to do about that. The Senate version that went through didn't have all that in there. It was pretty clean. It didn't touch SNAP. And so now we're at the point where we've got members of the House and members of the Senate that are trying to come together in conference to figure out what to do with the bill.
So realize one of the reasons that people, cooler heads have prevailed and seen that there's probably not a good idea to separate nutrition from the other rest of the titles of the farm bills because, again, 80% of the money is being spent on nutrition. But guess what? If you live around urban centers, around urban areas, chances are your representatives, that's what they care about. They care about that 80%. Typically, it's your more rural your rural representatives and your rural, your senators who care more about the other piece. And so, because that affects their constituency. And so, it's kind of a bargain. It's kind of a deal where they shake hands and say, I'm going to care about your stuff.
It's absolutely a deal.
You're going to care about my stuff.
Yep,
and that's how it moves forward.
It's horse trading. I mean, that's what that's what they get to. I mean, it's all about let's make a deal. Right?
So your conservation.
So that's where they are right now is on the let's make a deal phase.
Yeah. So if you care about conservation title of the Farm Bill, this is why you need to understand that horse trading that's going on with those other programs, with both the commodity stuff and with the nutritional assistance program stuff, because conservation, it rides on those coattails.
So where we are right now, like Mike said, we've got a negotiation going on. We have a chance. So we're in what we call the lame duck session of Congress. That time between the November election and swearing in January of the new Congress. And so we're in this lame duck session where there's actually an opportunity to get a lot done. But you have to prioritize what you get done. And this is one of the things that there's actually a pretty strong push to try and get done. And so as of today, there's quite a bit of movement in both the House and the Senate. They're moving towards an agreement. We may see an agreement. We may see something that gets attached to a budget bill and could be voted on as early as December 7th. Or at the latest, I should say, the latest December 7th, if it's attached to a budget bill. I think that's when they have to, when a budget has to be approved is December 7th.
Right.
For
reauthorization or
or continuing resolution, right? For a portion. I know we have one that runs. We have a budget that runs something to April or something of next year, maybe beyond that. Yeah. But that funds most of government, but there's some of it that's still not funded that has to be dealt with now. That's more than we need to get into. But this could be attached to that, or it could potentially be a standalone and go on its own. And at that point, they have until the end of the year to get it done.
Right.
But they'll go on a recess around the holidays too. So the days in Congress to get it done are limited.
Right. Yeah. Well, sometimes they work through, but
sometimes.
And one part of the big discussion really is around the SNAP benefits, and it'll be a question on whether the House and the Senate can come together. There's some conservative think tanks that are influential that are basically telling the House of Representatives and the members that are involved in these negotiations that you need to double down. You need not to compromise on anything. You've got all the power in the world. We can get this done.
But just remember, they lose all that power in the world come January.
I understand. I'm saying that these particular groups are saying you should not cave. But they're the same ones that are suggesting that this is not the kind of thing that needs to be negotiated out for 5 years at a time. It needs to be every 6 months or so.
Right. But I think they're looking at another 5-year deal. And frankly, the election going the way it did with the House flipping, Democrats taking control of the House, may create some motivation to try and get a deal done during this Congress, during this lame duck session.
So I'm going to go back and talk just briefly, very quickly about some conservation title of the Farm Bill stuff and why that 5-year cycle is important. And remember, when you're developing a conservation program for an entire block of land, when you're using tools like the Conservation Reserve Program for buffer strips, like the Conservation Stewardship Program to take care of soil, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which has things like irrigation efficiency, fish ladders, a voluntary public access habitat incentive program, which is built into easement into EQIP now, and then the easement programs that we talked about. It's hard to set that stuff up. It's not a 6-month job. Security and the ability to know what you have to work with over a long period of time is critical both to these landowners and to the planners who have to put this conservation planning on the ground. That's why you can't just kick this down every
there's a
every
value
couple months
in a
and not work.
5-year deal.
Yeah,
Well,
you have to have certainty.
I know Dave has. I've been involved in easements
Yeah, I have.
that have fallen under these programs exactly, and sometimes it takes a couple of years to iron them out.
Yeah, I was involved in one that took 7 or 8 years to iron out. I mean, some of these deals don't get done overnight. Most of them don't get done overnight.
And I was a conservation planner working on those plans, and you have to know what programs you're going to be able to rely on to put that conservation on the ground.
Exactly. So there you have it. That's kind of we got into the weeds a little bit, but that's as close to a 30,000 foot overview of the Farm Bill, and particularly the conservation title and the nutrition title. And we didn't even get into any details of the nutrition title, just kind of telling you what it is, and it's the elephant in the room from a funding standpoint. So just know that that's out there. This is going on. This piece is important to sportsmen. This is important to you if you like clean water, and your wildlife and opportunities to fish and hunt. It's important. And you should pay attention to this. There's a lot of money going to conservation here. And this is a big deal. We might see something by the end of the year, but keep your eye on it. And then keep listening to us, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're going to try and follow this up with bringing some people into the room and having a real dialogue around
people who are using it.
So they can talk about their experiences using the conservation programs of the Farm Bill and why it's important to them, and then get some folks from the sportsman's community to talk about why it's important to the sportsman community, why this has become an issue that the agriculture community and the sportsman's community have been able to walk arm in arm into Congress and say, this is important. This needs to pass. We need to have the Farm Bill reauthorized. All right. And so that's where we are. And I'm going to leave it there for now. So I want to say, hey, thanks you guys, obviously, for doing this again tonight. Thanks for indulging me as I talk about what I had for dinner. All the tacos I eat. Maybe I won't do that again, but
I hope not.
It was to make a point, right? It was to drive a point home.
Driving a point home.
And
just for, posterity's sake, let the record show that Dave is wearing the Nirvana shirt again.
Heck yeah. I think this might be my official podcasting shirt.
He only has 3 shirts.
I'm wearing 2 of them.
All right.
That's true. And I'm wearing,
wrap it up, bro.
Pants with holes in them. But it's the Nirvana shirt. This is kind of the official Your Mountain podcast shirt. Anyway, as always, remember, life is about experiences, so go have one.